Welcome to Falling Through the Cracks. Feel alive and thrive with Dr. Rebecca Risk. Do you ever feel that even though nothing seems seriously wrong and you pass all the medical tests, that you still feel that your health, pain, and fatigue are completely out of control? It doesn't have to be that way. Listen to the tips and suggestions given on our program today and take back control of your health. Now, here is Dr. Rebecca Risk.
Hi everybody, welcome to Falling Through the Cracks. Today I'm speaking with Jonno Proudfoot and he's joining us from South Africa. Jonno spent the early part of his career as a professional chef cooking in top-rated restaurants. He is the CEO of Real Meal Revolution and the best-selling author of the book The Real Meal Revolution. Jonno, welcome to the show.
Very much for having me, Rebecca. It's a pleasure to be here.
So what got you involved in writing, this book and talking about this particular diet? How did you get involved in this?
It's a relatively long story, but I'll try and keep it brief. When I was training as a chef and working as a chef, I always saw myself specializing as a sort of performance food chef. So I was very keen on doing kind of meal plans and getting involved in the nutrition side of food for professional athletes. And Professor Merckx, who you may know, famous sports scientist, he was someone I always wanted to work with. And in about 2010, he changed his tune on carbo loading and what the best food for athletes actually was. And he started endorsing a low-carbohydrate diet, and it became very, very well known in South Africa. And I kind of thought it would be a great idea to partner with him to write some books that would make his sort of diet come across as a lot more delicious. So I approached him to try and make his diet seem more delicious. At the time, I still thought it would be better for athletes. And one thing led to another, and it turns out that, the diet we were working on became much better at reversing type 2 diabetes and, restoring health in a lot of chronic illnesses.
So the diet we're talking about in South Africa, you call it the Banting diet. What would that be compared to in North America?
Yeah, so Banting, LCHF, the Keto diet, they're all very much the same thing, but the main emphasis on all three would be eating, reducing your carbohydrates, or actually before that, reducing your sugars, and staying away from refined carbohydrates and processed food, fast food, junk food.
So, the keto diet is what everybody says here, and it's become more and more popular. And there are still some. Everybody has their own opinion about everything, and one of the main things about that diet is to go grain free. So what is the theory behind that?
So the issue with grains, or my understanding of the issue with grains, is that humans weren't necessarily designed to eat them. And we can go into a long talk about the history of human beings, and obviously people will argue that, we've evolved at varying rates, or that evolution doesn't exist, which is certainly an argument I've been tested. So to look at it right now, and just look at what is actually happening right now, I find to be the most useful. And the first thing is that gluten, has a negative impact on a lot of people. Some believe that more than a third of the Earth's population are actually mildly or severely intolerant to gluten. So that's the first reason we advise people not to eat bread. And that relates to the impact that gluten has on gut permeability. So I don't know how much detail you want me to go into, but basically, there's a scientist in California called Alessio Fasano, and he discovered a mechanism in the gut that is stimulated by the ingestion of gluten, whereby the cells in your gut lining actually separate and can stay separated for up to 24 hours. And when that happens, you allow what the contents of your gut into your bloodstream, and then you end up circulating, the contents of your gut throughout your body, and that's obviously associated to chronic inflammation and a whole lot of diseases. And Dr. Perlmutter, who wrote Brain, he talks a lot about its relationship with neurological diseases, and another doctor called William Davis talks about the relationship between Crohn's and cardiovascular conditions. But from our side, we just look at it as on a very pedestrian level at Lucid. Our main gripe is with refined carbohydrates or high carbohydrates in general. They and that's because Prof. Noakes' research relates more closely to insulin resistance. And my understanding of insulin resistance. Remember that I'm the chef. I'm not the technical guy. So
For sure.
My understanding of insulin resistance. Yeah, my understanding of insulin resistance is that basically, the other word you use to describe insulin resistance is carb intolerance. And basically, if everyone sits on a scale of how tolerant they are to carbohydrates, and you get people who are incredibly tolerant, which would mean that they can eat quite a lot of carbs and not put on weight. And then you get people who are very intolerant of carbs, and just a little bit of carbohydrates makes them gain weight. But the reason you would gain weight is because your body has an insulin response to carbohydrates. And that means that the moment carbohydrates enter your bloodstream, you secrete insulin, which then actually pushes the glucose in your blood. So obviously carbs enter your bloodstream in the form of glucose. If insulin is secreted, and it immediately pushes all of that blood sugar into your fat cells. And basically the more insulin resistant or the more carb resistant you are, the more insulin you end up pumping through your veins. And that's what is associated to, or what causes type 2 diabetes, chronic inflammation, gout, heart disease, and a few other chronic illnesses. So Prof. Noakes' argument, and what we put out in the Real Meal Revolution, was that it's not saturated fat that causes heart disease and diabetes and high blood pressure, and that in fact it's actually sugar and refined carbohydrates that cause heart disease, type 2 diabetes, and all these things. And that if you actually embrace saturated fat and reduce the carbohydrates and sugar, you can reverse your diabetes and various other chronic illnesses.
Well, so we did a very long fat-free fad in North America, and I think the world embraced that. In America, I'm in Canada, but we're not far behind. There's an obesity epidemic, and we were fat-free. And then, do you think that being fat-free led to more carb cravings, and then spurned on, these issues that we're having now?
Absolutely. I mean, just from a chef's perspective, fat adds so much flavor to food, and it also carries the flavor in a lot of food. Like if you've ever made a curry, you would fry your spices in the fat because it makes because it infuses the fat with all of that flavor before it cooks the rest of the food. So fat adds a lot of flavor, and it also makes you feel really full. And so what they've ended up needing to do after removing fat from all of the food is add sugar to make it more palatable. And I mean, I think we've seen what's happened. So yeah, you're totally right. I think that removing fat from our diet has actually reduced our satiety and possibly actually caused us to consume more calories, or to actually just eat more in general. So yeah, I think you're totally right.
Yeah, I mean, sugar definitely. Eating a little bit of sugar, everyone tells me, and I've experienced this myself, of course, is then you're down a road of cravings for not even just that day. It can go on, and it's very difficult to control that. Cravings aren't logical. So you can end up down that road, over and over, and then keep eating, the foods that are causing the problems because your body's craving them.
Absolutely. I have this theory that I talk about quite often called the sticky rib theory, which also, so we don't necessarily only discourage people from eating sugar. We also encourage them to stay away from sweetness in general. So we kind of we say that artificial sweeteners are sort of in the gray area, and that's because of the sticky rib theory. And the sticky rib theory goes, if you have sticky pork ribs, you want to eat more and more of them because they're so sweet and delicious. And if you took the sugar out of them but made like an artificial sweet sticky sauce, you would probably still want to eat just as many ribs. But if you had to base those ribs with like coarse salt and rosemary, as for example, the chances are you probably wouldn't be able to get through a 2-pound rack of ribs. Whereas if they had whether the sauce was artificially sweetened or sugar sweetened, you'd probably still get through that rack. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure. I think we've all experienced that. I take my patients off of sugar, and I allow them to have a little bit, but they always tell me if they go for the white sugar that, it's almost uncontrollable what happens after, and then they don't feel good in other ways as well. So then they choose not to do it anymore, and it becomes part of a lifestyle. Where they may have fought me about it in the beginning, they realize how important it is not to consume these things that are hurting us so much. So one thing that I've noticed is, there's a lot of people who are embracing being keto or the Banting diet, but there's also a lot of people who are saying that it's not good for us at all. Do you have an opinion about that?
I have this argument every day with lots of people, and we also rant about it at the office. And I think it's the same for most diets. I think the same argument applies for veganism. There's a huge vegan faction. In fact, the vegan trend is the same size as the keto trend. If you look at Google Trends, they are matched in terms of the amount of people Googling about them. And a keto diet, I would say, is bad for you if you just eat like fat and if you just follow the macronutrient guidelines. And likewise with a vegan diet, if you just don't eat meat, but you don't care about anything else that you do after you quit, meat and all animal products, you might land up with a nutrient deficiency. So I think that it's very important that people who play around with their macronutrient ratios understand what it is that it does to the body, and then also understand that they need other nutrients, that there are other things at play. So the argument that keto as a blanket statement is unhealthy, I would say, I would pose the question back and say, so the diet that the person was on before they went on a keto diet, how healthy was that, for example? So no, I don't think the keto diet's unhealthy. I think it needs to be qualified. I certainly think that it's one of the healthiest ways of eating that I've ever seen. I've seen people going from being diabetic to the point where they would be close to losing a limb and reversing back to sort of normal health. I've seen people lose 88 kilograms. I don't know, in Canada, are you metric or are you imperial? But 88 kilograms is
Yeah, we're metric, but this is worldwide, so it's helpful for the Americans listening.
So 100, 100. I've seen someone lose 190 pounds on keto and have the doctor take them off high blood pressure medication, insulin, all their diabetes medication, sleeping pills, antidepressants. So to say that something's not healthy is it's not healthy to say things like that. I would say that the removing. So sorry. I'm just going to talk about this in slightly more detail. I was going through the America's Diabetes Association's new consensus report, which was released in the first week of May, and I was going through it this morning. And one of the things I noticed was that they give all the different diets that they analyzed to compile their report. And this is an organization who has been an advocate of the low-fat diet for 30 or 40 years. And in this report, which is only a week and a half old, which means it'll only become mainstream in the next 5 years, I suppose. They looked at the Mediterranean diet, the vegan diet, the low-carb diet, and the very low-carb diet, and then the DASH diet, which is like something to do with reducing hypertension. And all of those diets reduced A1C, which is that very clear marker for prediabetes or diabetes. It reduced blood pressure. They reduced the risk of diabetes. And what that tells me is that, if you're on a diet, it probably means that you're avoiding junk food and that you're avoiding sugar. And if that's the case, then you will become healthier. So beyond that point, the argument is okay, if all of these people are eating real food and they're paying very much attention to what they're eating, like what is the ultra super healthiest out of all of those? And that's where I think there could possibly be more research. But in general, I think we can all agree that avoiding junk and avoiding sugar is globally accepted as healthy. And the final thing I'll add is that in that report, it's the first sort of internationally published guideline that has been in full support of the low carbohydrate diet in the treatment of diabetes. They even said, like in no uncertain terms, whatever dietary approach you take, reducing carbohydrates is something that every single dietary approach should include.
Yeah, I definitely agree.
Not just me saying that.
We're going to take a quick break. I want to talk about it more when we get back. We're talking today with Jonno Proudfoot, and we're discussing his book, The Real Meal Revolution. We'll be back shortly.
Become our friend on Facebook. Post your thoughts about our shows and network on our timeline. Visit facebook.com/Voice America.
How much health and wellness information have you been exposed to today? Listen to Prescription for Success with Dr. Emil Haldi. Healing and empowerment start from within, but it also takes the best knowledge and advice. That's what you'll find here. Dr. Haldi and his guests will help you make the right life-enhancing decisions for well-being success. Tune in live every Thursday at 6 p.m. Eastern and 3 p.m. Pacific Time on the Voice America Health and Wellness Channel for Prescription for Success.
Are you finding your frequency? It can be described as that space between failure and success. It's the future of digital media. It's finding your voice. It's engaging topics, content, and ideas. Jeff and Ryan discuss the digital media space and all of its aspects. It's about making the mistakes, taking the chances, summoning the intestinal fortitude to step out of your comfort zone, and discovering what you can accomplish when you decide to try, decide to learn, decide that you have something to say, and find your frequency. Live Fridays at 12 noon Pacific Time, 3 p.m. Eastern Time on the Voice America Variety Channel.
Can grief be good for you? Absolutely. It gets your attention, helping you evaluate your choices and relationships. Your losses define who you are. Tune in each week for Good Grief with host Cheryl Jones. Our show features those who have made incredible transformations by grieving their losses. You'll learn how to find your courage and strength. You'll discover the important things in your life and how to let go of things that are less important. Good Grief airs live Wednesdays at 2 p.m. Pacific Time, 5 p.m. Eastern on Voice America Health and Wellness.
Have you friended us on Facebook yet? Why not? Just go to facebook.com/Voice America or search for the keywords Voice America. Once you are part of our Facebook network, you'll receive daily messages about what's happening with our shows, this week's featured guests, and new happenings at the Voice America Talk Radio Network. And you can add your voice to the always active discussions on our timeline. Just go to facebook.com/Voice America or search for Voice America.
You are listening to Falling Through the Cracks with your host, Dr. Rebecca Risk. To reach the program today, please call in to 1-866-472-5792. Again, that's 1-866-472-5792. You may also send an email directly to Dr. Risk. The email address is anantacalgary@gmail.com. Now, back to Falling Through the Cracks. Feel alive and thrive.
My co-host Oliver is a 7-pound Chihuahua cross, and he sits through all my shows with great puppy patience. He was super happy when I came home with Carbona Pet Stain and Odor Remover, which is an oxy-powered formula with active foam technology and is engineered to permanently remove pet stains and odor. Carbona is a household brand that has turned their decades of cleaning expertise into products that get the job done fully, quickly, and easily. Although he tries his best, Oliver sometimes does have accidents. I pulled out the Carbona Pet Cleaner and voila, we were stain-free and clean. It was easy to use, pet-safe, and hassle-free. The built-in 2-in-1 brush top tackles stains at the surface and deep into the carpet fibers. It is now my other best friend. Use code FTTC at carbona.com to save 20%. Hi, everybody. Cleaning. Welcome back. Today we're talking with Jonno Proudfoot. And Jonno, before the break, you were getting into the diets, just cutting out a lot of stuff will help people, which is a conversation I have with people as well, especially if they think that, being too strict is hard for them. I give, there's different, tiers of rules, and I say, let's start with something that might be something you can follow. And then if you want to be strict sometimes or do more, because I do find it very difficult for people to be 100% grain-free in this world. It's still hard to eat out. It's still hard to do something quick. A lot of people find anyways. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so you did right. Like, I have a very clear philosophy that, firstly, I don't necessarily think keto is for everyone. And we coach a lot of people, and our advice is to always cut out, one thing at a time. I think the idea of going keto off the bat, on your first day, it is almost impossible, and it creates what I call the house of cards effect. And that's when you make so many lifestyle adaptations in one go that after 2 weeks you have one slip up and end up collapsing everything because you just give up and move on like nothing happened. So you're absolutely right. When it comes to grains, in the book that you've got, Real Meal Revolution, there are 3 lists. There's the green list, the orange list, and the red list. And the red list lists all of the foods that are high in carbohydrates or that are highly processed and what we feel are unhealthy. And the orange list is foods that you should eat in moderation. And in the green list, obviously, foods that we think you can eat your fill of. And in the later edition, and on my website, we hand out the latest version of the lists, which are now 5 lists. And what we've done is split the red list into 2. So we've got the really red list and then the light red list. And the really red list is a list of gluten-containing grains, highly processed foods that you should avoid, and then various types of sugar. So we would say that those are definitely the biggest priorities to get rid of. You want to get, gluten-containing grains out of your diet. All foods that don't look like foods. So you're chicken nuggets. Generally anything that can go into the deep fryer out of the freezer, I would say, and then anything that has O's in the end of its name, or that is a type of sugar. Those you need to get out of your diet. I would say it doesn't matter who you are, you would benefit from removing those. And then the light red list, and this is the list that I actually still eat off. Like you were saying earlier, it's difficult to eat out. If you're not diabetic and you're not chronically ill and you just kind of want to avoid bloating and skin irritations, and you want to feel comfortable and sort of okay with food and you don't want to be put out that much, I would say that a gluten-free diet is kind of adequate for a lot of people. And that means you could still eat gluten-free breads, gluten-free pastas, there are a lot of academics who argue that there's a pseudo gluten response to a lot of gluten-free grain products, which I believe is true. I know people who've experienced the same thing. But for me, I say that like if you don't want to cut it out all at once, or you want like a soft landing, you go gluten-free like long before you go low carb. And then the orange list, which we do encourage people to eventually cut out if they are diabetic, is starchy vegetables and fruit. So it's all whole foods that are high in carbohydrates. And I'm an athlete, and I'm not particularly insulin resistant, so I eat plenty whole foods that are reasonably high in carbohydrates. But we have seen that diabetics, especially trying to lower their A1C and come off their medication, they're unable to do that without cutting out the light red and the orange list. So they basically end up only eating off the green list, which still includes like great meats and great vegetables and good healthy fats.
Well, so is there a point if a diabetic is following just the green list that their body gets better and they can tolerate some of the other foods?
Yeah, so one of the things we put a lot of emphasis on, not in the first iteration. So the first iteration of the diet is mainly like an introduction to the science, and since then we've developed more like practical ways of implementing the science. But the science is still most definitely all in the first book. So, look, if you've been diabetic for like 15 years, it's very difficult to turn back the clock. We have seen people come off their medication, and what they end up doing is staying pretty strict keto for a long period of time. But as you learn your body's response to the occasional, I don't like to say cheat meal, I like to say celebration meal, because cheat kind of adds morality to the situation, which where it really has no place. But when you have a celebration meal, you end up seeing an insulin response, or you get knocked out of ketosis, and each person has a different reaction. So really, everyone is totally different. And I have seen many people who once they get their gut lining fully restored, so this means like spending a good year or even longer, sort of like nurturing their gut bacteria, avoiding things on the red list that would kill off the bacteria or that would damage the gut lining. Once they've got their gut banging on all cylinders, I have seen people who are able to add in an unhealthy meal on occasion. But I would say that as soon as you start adding in sugars and refined carbohydrates, you end up feeding the wrong bacteria and causing the same damage that got you to where you were in the first place. So it's probably a slightly bitter pill to swallow.
Yeah.
But I think it outweighs what you give up. Yeah.
Yeah, and you would hope that, especially if it takes a year to see some dramatic healing. I know it will happen faster than that, but a year to turn everything around and be able to eat some foods again. You would hope that at that point it's become a lifestyle and you're enjoying how you're feeling instead of this is a diet that I have to do at that point.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's the thing. Like, you can make it delicious. And that's really what people, that's what we try and encourage people to do. We've just always wanted to make low carb as delicious as humanly possible. And I was telling you over email about my latest book, Low Carb Cooking. And the idea with that book was to give people basically 300 low carb recipes. And I'm from a restaurant background, so I try to make them as delicious as possible and focus on technique. And the idea with that was to get people to commit to cooking as often as they could and trying their best to learn techniques and make food delicious, so that instead of dieting, they're actually acquiring a skill and nurturing a hobby. And then weight loss then becomes a side effect and not the main focal point, or health becomes the side effect and not the focal point.
Which I think, is the point of changing your diet, is to feel good and enjoy how you're feeling. Now, aside from diabetes, is there anything else that people would see a change in if they did this?
Absolutely. I mean, the benefits are, some of them are quite like, I don't know how to say it. Some of them are quite minor. Like, you wouldn't realize that they are, that how much they bug you until they actually go away. And we've had people talk about like vastly improved sleep. I mean, the five biggest are weight loss, reversal of type 2 diabetes, disappearance of irritable bowel syndrome, normalized blood pressure, and vastly improved sleep. So those are the five sort of the big guys. And then further down, you know, when you're in ketosis, I mean, you will have experienced this. You have this like euphoric lucidity, so you get incredible mental clarity, and what we call boundless energy. So you just feel more energetic, almost like you're on a high. For those who are particularly unhealthy, we say you get improved athletic performance. And I don't want people to confuse that by saying a keto diet will make you perform better. But all the science has said that a keto diet and a normal diet don't outperform each other in any way. The reason they say your performance improves when you're on a keto diet is because you perform best when you're at your healthiest. And for people who are quite sick, and manage to rejuvenate their health through a keto diet, their athletic performance will improve because they are healthier. So yeah, like a lot of people have come back saying they had like achy bones, joint aches and pains from sort of being old. Well, they would think that it's because of old age, and actually when they go on keto, those aches and pains just disappear. The clearance of gout, the removal of polycystic ovarian syndrome, or at least the reduction in the symptoms, and then a few other ones that are slightly harder to prove, but like the reduction in migraines and epileptic seizures. You'll know that they've used a ketogenic diet to treat epilepsy for years. In fact, I think that was where most of the research has actually been done. And then the sort of like broad sweeping statement is that it generally improves all blood markers, but mainly around heart disease, or heart disease risk, and it reduces chronic inflammation. So it sounds like it's like a magic pill, but you have to understand that, like, you know, that's from thousands and thousands of people giving us their feedback. So it's not like one person would necessarily get like 15 cures immediately, or they may well do, but that is the cluster of improvements that keto shows, especially to our audience.
Well, I mean, I don't know why you wouldn't want a reduction of all those symptoms. I mean, to me, I want to feel good in my life, and I know that it does make a big difference for a lot of people. I have seen that clinically. Now, that being said, is there proof? You've talked a little bit about some studies like on the seizures and stuff, but is there proof that going grain-free and following this is going to help us?
Yeah, so there are a lot of studies that have been done. Not many studies that have gone on for longer than 2 years. I mean, the most current study is a study that's an ongoing proprietary study with a Silicon Valley startup called Verta Health. And I mean, for those listeners who are aware of Steve Phinney and Jeff Volek, they're the sort of godfathers of the keto diet, and they've actually started a company where they combine coaching, dietitian sort of customized eating, and medical monitoring, like on a 24-hour basis for diabetics. And they have gotten, I think, an 87% success rate after the first year for their patients or clients, whichever you want to call them, reducing or completely coming off their diabetes medication. So they've actually set out to reverse diabetes in America. And the reason I mentioned those two guys, Steve Phinney and Jeff Volek, is because they've been researching low carbohydrates and the impact on exercise performance and diabetes I think since like the late 80s. I think 87 was when it first started. So if you just Google their names, you'll see like ample studies coming up with, and these are not like random studies. They actually are random studies because they're RCTs, so randomized controlled trials, etc. It's just that the latest studies was run within their company with their own clients, and that's why it's a proprietary study. And that's Further Health. So they've got all the data, and Steve Finney and Jeff Rolick have got tons of science. There's also, if you just Google keto science, you'll hit a page on the Diet Doctor website where they list, I think, over 70 different clinical trials and meta-analysis of, some epidemiological stuff that all support the low-carb diet. So there is actually a lot more research out there than people think.
Yeah, which is good to know because, as with every diet, it's controversial, but to know that this has been looked at and something that is going to help, I think will help people make that decision for themselves even better. We're going to take a quick break. We're talking today with Jonno Proudfoot, and we're discussing his book, The Real Meal Revolution. We'll be back shortly.
Become our friend on Facebook. Post your thoughts about our shows and network on our timeline. Visit facebook.com/Voice America.
How much health and wellness information have you been exposed to today? Listen to Prescription for Success with Dr. Emil Haldi. Healing and empowerment start from within, but it also takes the best knowledge and advice. That's what you'll find here. Dr. Haldi and his guests will help you make the right life-enhancing decisions for well-being success. Tune in live every Thursday at 6 p.m. Eastern and 3 p.m. Pacific Time on the Voice America Health and Wellness channel for Prescription for Success.
Are you finding your frequency? It can be described as that space between failure and success. It's the future of digital media. It's finding your voice. It's engaging topics, content, and ideas. Jeff and Ryan discuss the digital media space and all of its aspects. It's about making the mistakes, taking the chances, summoning the intestinal fortitude to step out of your comfort zone, and discovering what you can accomplish when you decide to try, decide to learn, decide that you have something to say, and find your frequency. Live Fridays at 12 noon Pacific Time, 3 p.m. Eastern Time on the Voice America Variety Channel.
Can grief be good for you? Absolutely. It gets your attention, helping you evaluate your choices and relationships. Your losses define who you are. Tune in each week for Good Grief with host Cheryl Jones. Our show features those who have made incredible transformations by grieving their losses. You'll learn how to find your courage and strength. You'll discover the important things in your life and how to let go of things that are less important. Good Grief airs live Wednesdays at 2 p.m. Pacific Time, 5 p.m. Eastern on Voice America Health and Wellness.
Have you friended us on Facebook yet? Why not? Just go to facebook.com/Voice America or search for the keywords Voice America. Once you are part of our Facebook network, you'll receive daily messages about what's happening with our shows, this week's featured guests, and new happenings at the Voice America Talk Radio Network. And you can add your voice to the always active discussions on our timeline. Just go to facebook.com/Voice America or search for Voice America.
You are listening to Falling Through the Cracks with your host, Dr. Rebecca Risk. To reach the program today, please call in to 1-866-472-5792. Again, that's 1-866-472-5792. You may also send an email directly to Dr. Risk. The email address is anantacalgary@gmail.com. Now, back to Falling Through the Cracks. Feel alive and thrive.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back. Today we're talking to Jonno Proudfoot, and we're discussing his book, The Real Meal Revolution. So, Jonno, one thing that comes up is that if we all change how we're eating, this is going to change how agriculture and everything else looks like. What do you think would be the future of all of that?
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. it's a huge issue, and I think the beauty of it, or maybe the complexity of it is going to stump everyone, because I believe that there's a different solution for every single country here. Every country has its own soil type, its own climate, and its own financial policies around agriculture. But just to paint the picture for the listeners, most of the grains, the reason our staples are grains like corn and wheat is because, for the most part, they're subsidized by the government. That's the first point. So it's cheaper for farmers to grow them, and it's cheaper for consumers to buy them. But they also have, lasting shelf life, which means that, they can last the whole year. So they provide sort of an element of food security. The problem is that these foods are cheap and are thought to cause bad health. And the foods that are actually the healthiest for us to eat end up being, very expensive, and they don't have a very long shelf life. So if you had to imagine that a third of America, just for example, because it is actually a third, if that's 100 million people, if a third of them are diabetic and they then go onto a keto diet, that means that, that's a third of the American grain supply, or at least grain demand, drops. And then, a whole lot of other produce will then become in demand. But that'll obviously be more expensive and not subsidized by the government, and potentially have a much lower shelf life or shorter shelf life. So there are huge shifts. And I think the reason I love talking about this is because it's taken the state and policy and agriculture and health to get us to the position we're in now, where there are these chronic health and obesity epidemics around the world. And I think it's naive to think that it's just a dietary policy change that's going to reverse the clock there. I think that it's going to take, tax legislation, the laws of agriculture, possibly even distribution, the way food gets distributed, as well as dietary policy and medical policy to reverse the clock on the obesity and chronic ill health epidemic. And I think the final point there is that it's unique to every country or every type of human being, because the Japanese have been eating rice for centuries and they're fine. Whereas if you put someone who's insulin resistant in front of a plate of rice, they sort of look at it and put on 2 kilograms. And likewise, the Incas and the Incas and the Aztecs, they were eating corn or quinoa as their staple sort of thousands of years ago, and they didn't have obesity as an issue. And in South Africa, I know we used to grow this spinach in South Africa called morogo, which was 32 grams of protein per 100 grams. And our diet was mostly that and a grain called sorghum. And you take the sorghum and the morogo away and give them corn and wheat, and all of a sudden they have diabetes and obesity. So I believe that, and obviously all of these grains, they all grew naturally without irrigation and without sort of major manhandling in all of their natural climates. So I believe that, the way to get back there is for people to look at what grows naturally, what grows best, because those options will be the more sustainable options. And unfortunately, I think it is unique to every country, or to at least every climate.
Well, and, I think we could go into this a little deeper, but we're not going to have time today. But, I've done some shows on agriculture, and I know that one thing that doesn't always happen is the grains and everything grows better if you're rotating your crops. And, that is something that should start to happen as well, so that we have more variety and we're not just growing wheat, because that's also damaging our soil and causing other problems. So when you're recommending people start on this diet, where do they start? What do people do?
Yeah, so the first thing we get them to do is to get them to sit and think about why they're actually doing it. and then to look at, to try and create a sort of to create like a positive vision for their health. And I think the reason we do that is, low carb diets, it's not a one size fits all. And what we find is that when people adapt when they obey the rules, as it were, those rules, if something doesn't work for them, they tend to write off the whole program, as opposed to just narrowing it down to one or two things that aren't working. So what we find is really important is for people to commit to actually making a transformation in their lives before they try actually change anything in the way they eat. Because if you go in knowing that you're gonna get healthier or get thinner or get fitter no matter what, then you're a lot harder to rattle when things don't go your way. So the first thing is definitely to set a goal and draw a line in the sand.
That's an important conversation to have, because if you're resistant to making changes, or you're having cravings and you don't know really why in your heart you're doing it, and I think for some people assessing as well how important it is for them to make those changes, because people don't always ask themselves those questions. Do I want to continue feeling this way? Am I okay with what's happening right now in my body?
Yeah, absolutely. So there are two sides to that process that we deal with. The one is we create what we call like a web of accountability. So we ask people to actually document all the people in their lives, from colleagues to coaches to medical professionals, friends, family, etc. And then categorize them into like 4 different categories. So it's, the people in your life who you're just going to tell, and then you split that into 2 groups. Like the one is the people who are going to support you, and the other is the people who are going to drag you down, so that you have them on like a blacklist and you're aware, like that person's a naysayer. So, don't be surprised if they try and crush your goal. Mm-hmm. And then there's the people who are supporting you. So that's your coach, your medical professional, etc. And then there's your partners in crime. So these are the people you're going to turn to when you're suffering and they're suffering, because suffering builds community. So you've got like your your band of brothers, or I think partners in crime is probably the best way to explain it. And then the last group is what we call it is creating a way to make your goal bigger than you. So when you make your goal about someone else, it's much harder to give up on it. And so sometimes you can pledge you can pledge an amount that you're going to donate to charity when you achieve your goal. But sometimes it's as simple as just writing down, the 10 people in your life who you're closest to, and how they will benefit if you achieve your goal, or if you improve your health. And usually it's really easy to paint that picture. You go up the mountain with your daughter, or you can be supportive to your parents in their old age, or you can just be a better employee, you be a better friend, etc. You can inspire these people. So, and the reason we set that up is so that when someone's feeling shaky, they have this picture that they've painted of how like all the people in their life will respond when they do achieve what they want to achieve. And generally, that is something that's really inspiring to look toward. But it's also, it keeps you very accountable, because you don't want to fall back on you don't want to let all those people down as well. So we call it a web of accountability.
I like that you have that conversation for a couple of reasons. One, I always talk to patients about how when you're not well, your relationships are always affected. You're tired, you're sore, you're not who you could be showing up. And so you have to do the work so that you can heal those. But also, recognizing that they are affected, and who's going to be there to support you, and who maybe you should avoid until you feel a little stronger if they are going to try to sabotage what you're doing.
Totally. So that's the one step that we take, and that's totally right. changing the nature of a relationship is often better than terminating one. So if you have a friend you usually go and eat cake with, make that the friend that you go and walk the dog with. So there are those tweaks you can make. The second thing that we tell people to look at is what we call it's a future self exercise. So the first thing is taking all of that information from the summons and getting them to try and associate like massive pleasure with putting in the work. So it comes out in the form of a story. We tell them to write a story as, in present tense, but in the future. So in 10 years' time, you would write like what your life is like, sentence by sentence. So about your health and about the relationships and about the way you see food. And if you write something like, I only eat food that serves my ultimate goal to be really healthy, that's a lot better than saying, I don't eat cake. Because, maybe like a slice of cake once a quarter or once a month actually serves your ultimate goal, which is to be mostly healthy. So we get them to really work. It's like a copywriting exercise, just as much as it is like a vision creating exercise. And then at the same time, we get them to do the opposite, which is to write a picture or a list of all the terrible things that could happen if they follow the opposite trajectory. So what you do is you create like mass pain neurological pathway with the negative behavior, and then mass pleasure with the positive behavior. And research says that actually rewires neurological pathways in your brain, and you begin to associate like eating healthily with mass pleasure and great things that are potentially going to happen in your life. So that's before you even clear out your cupboard. I think you should do that because then I think you'll be unstoppable.
Well, yeah, and a lot of people, they decide to do something, but they don't assess why. So it is really important to do that. I love your book as well. I haven't seen your new one, but I was actually sharing a lot of your recipes with people because they looked so delicious, which is your goal.
That's awesome.
And it's important for people to realize that this isn't torturous. A lot of people say, well, if I remove gluten or grains, what is there left? And there's so much more left. There's so much more food in the world than just that one thing. But it's important to experiment. I mean, you're changing a habit, so it is hard at first, and there's always resistance. It's human nature. But you've made it, taste better and look better. So thank you.
Well, thank you. That's very kind of you. I appreciate that.
So if there's anybody who wants more information, how can they get in touch with you or find your book?
Yeah, best thing is to hit my website, which is realmealrevolution.com. And if you wanted to download the lists that I was talking about, it's in the top navigation menu. It says Banting /Keto food lists. And then if you want to get a hold of our books, that's under the resources tab. And you can look at all 4 of the books, and the links are there to buy them from pretty much anywhere in the world. So it's realmealrevolution.com. And then if you want the list, it's the Banting Keto food lists, and under resources, you'll find all of our books. And then you can just email support@realmealrevolution.com if you want to get in touch.
Which is great. And, picking up the book, even if you're not going to be 100% following this, you're going to have some great meals and you're going to be healthier, just making a few decisions. And we talked about it doesn't have to be perfect 100%. It's just making that decision for yourself to be a little bit healthier.
Absolutely.
Well, I want to thank you so much for joining me today. It was a really informative episode.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Rebecca, and thank you very much to the listeners for listening. I hope they enjoyed it as much as I did.
Well, thanks so much. Today we were talking with Jonno Proudfoot, who joined us from South Africa, and we were discussing his book, The Real Meal Revolution. If you want more information about my story or what I went through, you can find that on my website at dr-risk.com. Don't forget to follow me on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram, and thank you so much for listening today. Just be sure to make today a great day.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's edition of Falling Through the Cracks. Feel alive and thrive. Please join Dr. Rebecca Risk again next Monday at noon Eastern Time and 9 a.m. Pacific Time on the Voice America Health and Wellness channel. We'll talk more next week.